If you're tired of African cichlids acting like African cichlids, then stick around for 5 things you can do to curb African cichlid peacock and hap aggression in your tank. Here we go. Let's talk about Decor. But first, let me remind you to stick around to the end of the video. I'm going to have a bonus tip for you. Sometimes less is more and more is less. Okay, maybe that doesn't make much sense, but here's the thing. Sometimes when one trick isn't working, you try the opposite. By the way, for the rest of this video, if I refer to African cichlids, I am only talking about peacocks and haps, not Tanganyikans or mbuna. These guys love open swimming space, so I usually try to keep it as open as I can, while still having a tank that I find visually beautiful. I would recommend always starting off using this concept if you can. Keep an open floor plan. This may work very well for you, and the Africans like to stake claim on property. So the more you have in the tank, the more trouble you could be inviting. You might have a well-behaved fish who all of a sudden decides that this tiny rock is now somehow worth killing everyone who comes near it. Or maybe this fake plant is to die for, literally. A few little chases are to be expected, but if they're relentless, going after the same fish all the time, fish are getting injured, or there's corralling of the other fish to one side of the tank, then I feel it's time to do something different. So going minimalist with the Decor might work for years, but when it doesn't, it could be time to mix it up a bit. I had this happen to me recently. I had some natural rocks in the tank, but they were a bit rough and pointed, and some of my guys were injuring themselves on them. By the way, if you have real rocks, make sure your fish aren't going to damage their scales or eyes on them in the middle of the night. Smooth rounded rocks work great. I just don't like the way they look for my intentions with the African cichlid tank. So I removed my rocks and ordered some fake ones. I intended to leave it pretty bare until the new rocks arrived, but some attitudes started to flare, and fish were getting chased constantly. And it wasn't quick little chases. Fish were getting injured. I have an 8-foot tank, and these chases would go from one end to the other, with all my guys except for a few hanging out on half the tank. It was my thought that adding some breaks in the line of sight should help, so I added some tall fake plants here and there. This was my aquarium with real rocks, and then after they were removed with my temporary minimalist tank with the line of sight breaks, just before my new Decor arrived. If one fish is being terrorized by another and the heat is on, he can weave through a few of my plants, and the terror seems to either think he vanished into thin air or his little fish brain forgot what the heck he was doing in the first place. I can just hear him thinking in his head, well, back to my corner. Wait, who's that in my corner?
Dead meat.
Anyway, adding the line of sight breaks did work to shorten the chase scenes in my tank, and some of the offending fish have since mellowed out, most of them in fact. It's pretty peaceful most of the time now with no new injuries to report, but I still wound up rehoming a few of my guys. They just wouldn't quit. Now they live in a large tank with a great fish keeper who takes great care of them somewhere else. And you never know, they could have a complete change of disposition simply from starting in a fresh new environment. Which brings me to my next tip for you. Let's say you and your wife are in a heated argument just before you leave on a long business trip, and you're both so angry you don't even call while you're away. You arrive back home and it turns out she remodeled the entire home while you were gone. You walk through that door and nothing looks familiar. You think, where am I? You also forget entirely about the argument you'd been having, and even forget who the heck she is. Well, as far-fetched as that hopefully seems to you, it's not such a bad idea when it comes to African cichlids. And speaking of not such a bad idea, it would be a great idea if you would just like and subscribe right now, if you've enjoyed this video so far. If you have a bad boy who just won't change his ways, you can remove him from his home and relocate him for about a week or so. It's a great idea to have a backup tank somewhere that you can use in an emergency. It's best if it's already up and running, but if you have at least one that you can get going in a hurry, you'll be happy when you need it. Here's my 75-gallon aquarium I call my rest home tank. It's where special needs fish like my albino Apache peacock go. I believe he has poor vision and he has a difficult time finding his food. Anyway, I also use this tank for timeouts for bullies. Depending on how things are going, they'll either get the presidential suite with the full run of the tank to swim in, or they'll spend their week in the janitor's closet, this penalty box. These things are great for timeouts, by the way. This version has a mesh net over a plastic frame, so it has plenty of water movement and it's really inexpensive. The link to that is in the video description. After the week is up, I'll place him back in the original tank, but this part is important. Make sure that you do it during a water change and add a few fish back with him. This will help spread the aggression out, and you'll need that because he isn't going to remember that anyone was afraid of him, and no one else is going to remember that they were afraid of him either. So he can get picked on pretty severely if you're not careful here. If you don't have any fish to place back in the tank with him, then a few days before he goes back, take a few non-dominant males out and place them in the rest home tank with him. Then put them all back together at the same time. Anytime you add or remove fish, it can start a civil war in the tank, so proceed with caution. While this works at reducing aggression, in my experience, the terrorist will typically revert to being a terrorist again eventually. But if you love your fish and you want to keep them, then this is definitely worth a try before rehoming. If you've ever tried this with your own fish, drop a comment with what you did and how it worked for you. We can all learn from your experience. One thing about most African cichlids, they hate anyone who even looks a little bit like they do. So maybe when you are selecting fish for your tank, keep this in mind. It might be a bad idea to get two similar looking fish, and an even worse idea to get two of the exact same kind of fish.
You hate me, and I hate you even more.
When a fish has a distaste for another fish of the same species, it's called conspecific aggression, and most Africans have it. Take my guys for example. I have this Banga yellow sunshine, this ruby red, and this, not actually sure what he is anymore, I forgot. But they are all at least somewhat similar. Now that they're full grown, these once docile fish have stepped up their game. They're not full-blown terrorists yet. It's more like they're in training in some smaller sect somewhere, and they tend to chase each other around more than anyone else. I used to have two ruby reds, and I'll tell you, it was
Vicious.
I had to rehome one of them. Unless you have a much larger tank than what I have, they'll find each other, and one of them will probably wind up in the ditch somewhere. Okay, aquariums don't have ditches, but you know what I mean. One will have moved on. There are some instances where you might have two of the same type of fish in your tank with no problems, like with my two furcicatas. But I would recommend playing it safe and just keep one of a kinds in your tank. Maybe you've been able to pull this off, but I don't think I'll be trying this again anytime soon. Let's imagine for a moment that you're having issues with a coworker. You just don't get along. There are 5 of you working every day in a 20 by 20 room. Then you come to work one day and find there are now 40 of you in this room. You have to squeeze by someone with every step you take. You ask what the heck's going on because this sucks, and your boss says it's to stop you and this other guy from arguing all the time.
You're welcome.
That's the idea behind overstocking African cichlids. Stuff enough of them in there and it'll spread out the aggression. I understand the idea behind this practice and it's worked for many fish keepers. It may be worth trying for you also, but in my experience, even if you highly stock your tank, you can still wind up with one prison key holder in the tank keeping everyone else at bay, walking on eggshells, so to speak. Plus, you'll really have to step up your maintenance game, including water changes and filter cleanings. You'll also have to buy more expensive food to feed them all. I'd prefer to just keep the right blend of fish, even if it means rehoming a few, rather than going overboard on stocking levels. What are your feelings about this one? I know what you're thinking. Not another "that's what she said" joke. But I just had to. Bigger is better when it comes to aquariums, and especially when you have African cichlids. There are a lot of reasons why. They love open swimming space, and they love to swim fast. The minimum tank size you'll hear most say is about 75 gallons for an African cichlid tank. However, I'm here to share my opinion, and here it is. A 75 gallon might be fine for smaller peacocks that only get up to about 5 inches, and only if you have a few of them, like 6 or so. I used to have about 25 in my 75 gallon. And I soon realized that had I not upsized my tank, it would have been much too small for that many fish. Plus, many of them were going to get much larger than 5 inches. I'd say that if you're going to have Africans that are larger than 5 inches, and more than 6 of them or so, go with at least a 125. If you can go larger, do it. That'll give them 6 feet of open swimming from end to end, which they will very much appreciate. Also, it will give them room to get away from others who may have had their switch in their brains click, turning them from friendlies to psychopaths. I mean, if you were one of your cichlids, would you want to be trapped in a small or large room with a buddy who acted like this guy looks? Not trapped with him at all, I agree. And you never know when they're gonna snap. It could be in the middle of the night when all the lights are out. Creepy. In nature, they have an entire lake to seek refuge from insane brethren, but you have them confined in a small glass box. It's up to you how small that box is. Another reason you will want a larger tank with Africans is because they are supercharged poop machines. They love to eat and they seem to poop out more than how much food goes in. I don't know how they do it, but if you have African cichlids, you know what I mean. Nod your head. The larger water volume in your larger tank will afford you more leeway with water parameters. The smaller the tank, the less dilution of pollutants like nitrates there is. Small tanks are less forgiving, and these guys need a lot of forgiving. Amen? Anyway, go large is my point. Go large. I did promise you a bonus tip, didn't I? Okay, here you go. If you have an overly aggressive African cichlid who doesn't respond to your attempts to mellow him out, in my experience, he isn't going to have a change of heart, even if you keep trying. Can you keep trying? Sure, but you might be a lot less stressed out, and so might your other fish, by the way, if you just rehome the devil. Fish keeping should bring you joy, and if one of these fish is causing you to feel like you're living a nightmare, set the boy free. I don't ever kill my wicked ones. I have a local fish store that often takes them, and there are plenty of other cichlid keepers around where I live that will take them. It's not their fault they're completely insane. They were just born that way, I guess. Thanks for watching. I'll catch you next time.